Hello friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Raymond Nicolet Trust Podcast. My name is Gavrilo Nikolic, and every month I bring you inspiring conversations about the future of education, science and philanthropy from world top academics, scientists, Nobel Prize winners and philanthropists. My guest today is Professor Dragan Savic. Dragan received his PhD in water systems from University of Manitoba in Canada. Since 1994, Dragan has been teaching in the University of Exeter in the UK. He is UK's first Professor of Hydroinformatics, having held this post at the University of Exeter since 2001. He is also the CEO of QWR Water Research Institute, the Dutch Drinking Water Company's collective research organization, and distinguished professor at the National University of Malaysia. His research interests cover the interdisciplinary field of hydroinformatics, which transcends traditional boundaries of water and environmental science and engineering. If you're curious to learn about the future of water and water systems, as well as learn how to engage further with Dragan, you need to listen to this episode. In just a moment, the one and only Dragan Savic. Dragan, welcome to the RNT podcast.
Thank you very much, Gavrilo. I'm really pleased to be here with you today.
Let us start with basics. What do you do for a living?
That's an interesting one. My cheeky answer would be I work as a health professional because, say, drinking water and sanitation are crucial for human health and well-being. Readers of the British Medical Journal, I think, who are mostly medical doctors, voted sanitation as the greatest medical milestone of the 20th century. So, but I'm a water engineer by training, and I work as a professor at the University of Exeter, and also I'm the CEO of a Dutch water research organization institute called KWR Water Research Institute.
So before we jump into discussion on your field of studies, because you're working on something quite interesting called hydroinformatics, if I have pronounced that correctly, but before we jump into your field of studies, as I mentioned, could you please enlighten us a bit and tell us how water systems work in general? How much did water system change over the last 30 years?
Yeah, I mean, there are many water systems. We have urban water systems where water supply and distribution, urban drainage system, and sewer systems operate. Then we have irrigation systems for food production. We have hydropower systems for energy generation, canal system for transport. So all of those are water systems. I focus mostly on urban water and wastewater systems. And then if you're talking about water as a user, and as a user sees it, then not much. They haven't changed over the last 30 years in a sense that we have access to water 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, that if we have good quality water. And that's what probably is the most important, that the water quality has improved in terms of the delivery to people using it, but the sector itself has changed over that period considerably. You know, in the UK, it was privatized in the late 80s, and there were changes in governance in organization, but also how it's regulated. And the rest of the world has gone through not the same change, but very similar, whether we privatize or not our water supply systems, for example.
Before we come down to that question, is it better to have water systems privatized or not? I just recalled that I think it was a few years ago, I read one interesting article about Italy where it was mentioned that in some of the cities, I think in north of Italy, they're still using sewage and the water systems from the times of Roman Empire. Is that possible, or was that like a cheeky story to, get the tourists down to the northern part of Italy from across the world?
Yeah, some of the oldest sewage systems are from southern Italy. But the point about that is even in the UK, only like 10, 15 years ago, when they were digging up pipes, they dug out a wooden pipe. So it's a wood, the trunk of a tree with a small hole, longitudinal hole through it, because it has to withstand the pressure. So it cannot be thin, kind of wooden pipe. And they were working, no problem at all, and they were being used. So uh, I'm pretty sure some parts of the old systems were still being used in modern water supply systems or sewage systems as well.
That's good to hear. So I thought that was like just another article aiming to attract curious, but in the end of the day, I'm glad that you have confirmed that to me and also to our listeners. It's quite interesting to see that pretty much the basics of water systems did not change for millenniums now.
Yeah. Oh, the basics are the same, as you say. The pressure between 2 points pushes water one way or the other. That's all.
Now back to the, I think chicken or egg question in the end of the day. Do you believe it's better to have a public run and publicly owned water systems, or is it better to have privatized? Or maybe the question is wrong. Maybe the right question is more in the direction. Do you think there are more like, let's say, perks of having a system that is run by public operators, or the other way around? Do we have more flows maybe when we privatize the system and then have a market which is dominated by only a few players?
It's a very interesting and complex question, and I would answer probably by examples, because in the UK, where we have the privatized water systems or water companies, we had huge investment in the systems that were pretty much neglected over time or didn't have enough investment in them. So you could say that was one of the key benefits. But then on the other hand, these companies have shareholders that want to return on their investment. So you can say that's a downside of having that. But what happened, and in quite a few countries, and now I'm based full time in the Netherlands, um, they also had the same type of aggregation of water services providers from small into big ones. And big ones are better in having the capacity, the critical mass to better operate the system. So with privatization, what happened in the UK, there was kind of this agglomeration of companies, and in the States, you have tens of thousands of smaller suppliers, and they don't have the capacity, intellectual or management or technological capacity. So that's what the problem is. For me, it's not is it private or publicly run, but is it operated well? Do they have the capacity to operate it well and provide highest possible quality service to their customers?
I mean, I'm a lay person, but I fully agree with what you just said. It's about the capacity, not only maybe to deliver for the customers in the end of the day, but also to have a capacity for innovation. Because if you're a small operator, you cannot change things. So we could have more efficient water supply, a more effective water supply in the end of the day, but you're just operating in a way you used to operate because you're fully focused only on giving the right capacity to your end customer.
Yeah, I think you put the finger on it. The innovation is also something that is probably missing in those smaller utilities, because they need the facilities, they need high quality professionals to do that, and quite often they don't do it. So that's why kind of putting them together in some kind of association, or if you wish, as a joint company, is the way forward for all of them, private or not.
Indeed, indeed. Dragan, let us now turn to your field of studies that we can say you kind of, especially in the UK, founded, but you can correct me on that one. It's the field of studies called hydroinformatics. What is hydroinformatics all about?
Well, in most simple terms, hydroinformatics, or hydro stands for water, informatics for informatics, obviously. So, water informatics is a very happy marriage between water and information sciences. But it's not only about technology and that science. It's about making impact on society and helping it to become more sustainable through better management of water resources using digital technology means. And all of that can be only done if we put the human in the center of it. So, technology on its own cannot solve our problems. We need to have a proper kind of structures built into it, that people are engaged, that are aware of what is happening, and that's why hydroinformatics is there. It's kind of socio-technology, some people would say.
Exactly, I fully agree with you. I think 21st century in general is about us as humans learning how to integrate data, integrate technology in our daily lives so that it works for us, and know that in the end of the day we have technology there for the purpose of having technology on.
Yes, I mean, the last 30 years have seen this proliferation of sensors and computing, and the phone has more capacity these days, memory or computational capabilities, than the rockets that took people to the moon. So, in the last 2 years, for example, were 90% of all available data were generated. So when you say, how much is that? It's unbelievably exponential.
It's like a COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, on one hand, for the COVID pandemic, but fortunately for the sake of data, and as I already emphasized, so I think the real challenge is for us learning how to use that data, and then not just to have it in cloud and to base all our discussions on data just on one simple question: that is, how do we ensure data is protected or data is safe? I think that is important. That's part of the conundrum, but the real question is how do we use the data in a proper way so we get the best value out of it.
Yes, I mean, various parts of our life have changed through better usage of data through new means. If you think about transport, and if we think about Uber, how that changed um, one part of the transport industry, and then if you think about Airbnb as another example of how we book holidays and how we organize ourselves, or banking. Everybody these days have a banking app on their phone. And only 20, 30 years ago, we were going all the time to, banks to do our business. Now you can do it from wherever you are in the world.
Exactly. Dragan, I can say, and you can confirm that you are UK's first professor of hydroinformatics. How did you come up with the idea to set up this field of water studies as a separate discipline at the university level in the UK?
Well, the name hydroinformatics came from a colleague in the Netherlands. By the way, he was British, Michael Abbott, a British professor who was living and working in the Netherlands at IHE Water in Delft. And he kind of inaugurated the name and the put together the idea in his book, and I think it was in 1991. But the basis for all of this is something called the systems theory, where we look everything as a system, where there is a feedback loop, where we kind of do something. There is action, there is reaction. In a very simple term, that's what we used in hydroinformatics to use the data to model physical systems, replicate what is happening in the physical, say in the water system. We do it on our computer, then predict and work to improve those systems. Why do we do that? Because these are the large and complex systems that we cannot experiment on. I cannot just open valve and play or start a pump and see what happens. So I have to have what people now call a digital twin of a system. So that's what hydroinformatics is all about. And also the use of artificial intelligence in water management is important for hydroinformatics. Artificial intelligence kind of kicked off properly in practice only with the advent of computers in the 80s, or personal computers in the 80s, and then became kind of, when computers became ubiquitous, water professionals started benefiting from using these computers. So it was several things that came kind of together for me in the late 90s and early 2000s, and that's where I chose for my chair to be chair in hydroinformatics.
It's indeed a very interesting field of studies because it connects, let's say, different disciplines, but in the end of the day, it's dedicated to one sole thing, and that is making our water system more efficient and more effective. When you mentioned artificial intelligence, one question came to my mind, and it is quite interesting because it has to do with the future. With the cyber field and artificial intelligence in general. So, in terms of, let's say, latest news that we all received with the colonial cyber attack in the US that obviously addressed the colonial pipeline there when it comes to gas supply in the US. Do you believe something similar we would be able to see maybe in the near future, in let's say next 3 to 5 years, that some cyber terrorists, let's call them like that, would attack one of the water systems in the US, Europe, or anywhere else in the world?
Yeah, the risk always exists when you have systems like that, and there were attacks of similar in nature, but not as big as the one with the gas pipeline, I believe, in the States. So the situation is that we are relying more and more on these computers, on internet or networked facilities. So the opportunities for malicious attacks, cyber attacks, are also increasing. So I think the original case happened in Australia. This was probably about 15 years ago, when somebody who was working on that disgruntled employee who was laid off, or contractor, I believe, who was developing the system for the utility, remotely accessed it and controlled it and opened some sewers facilities, so to release raw sewer in the environment. So yes, few of these have happened, but they are very, very limited so far. And the water companies in the UK in particular, but around the world, in the Netherlands as well, they got wise, and they're dealing with that cybersecurity threat. At the company where I work, at the research institute where I work in the Netherlands, we had a project that was looking into cybersecurity. And because we are not cybersecurity experts, we were looking into what consequences of any possible cyber attacks could be on our system and how best we can protect it, the physical system, rather than looking into, again, cybersecurity where IT experts can provide that expertise.
Wow, this is really big. I did not expect this answer. I must say, I expected that water systems are already, let's say, proof from any kind of cyber security attacks. But in end of the day, you answered question in the way I assumed you are looking at that let's say issue, and that is that in the end of the day, you need to make a physical system proof for any kind of external cyber attacks. So in the end of the day, if cyber attacks happen, it can only initiate, let's say, some kind of response that will be limited in the scale of impact it will have on the wider population.
Yeah, I just wanted to make it clear that with technology there is always additional risk. When we were traveling by horses, and there was no risk of going 50, 60 miles an hour and getting accidents like that. So when the cars came, we have huge increase in risk, but we accepted it because it was a technology advance that allowed us to travel much faster. So it's the same thing with digital technologies in the water sector. We have to deal with a different type of risk with that cyber infrastructure.
Exactly, it's like the ongoing COVID pandemic. We need to learn how to live with the risks, and that's the only message we can give to the wider audience listening to this currently, not only about the water systems, but in general on how to deal with the life and consequences of making choices.
Yeah, correct.
Dragan, what are the biggest challenges our water systems are facing today?
Thank you. That's a really good question. If you look globally, The challenges are that climate change is acting upon us. So the changes in seasons, hot and cold and wet seasons are becoming more extreme. When you have hotter summers, you get higher consumption of water. When you have wetter winters, you have more flooding. So climate change basically is kind of exemplified through the impact on the water sector. That's one side of things. The other side of things is that we as humans are moving more into the cities. We are becoming more urbanized. More than half of the world population now lives in cities, and these cities are growing. And in the east, Southeast Asia, you have mega cities now. We're talking 10 plus million, and somebody needs to provide those services to a large population. So that's becoming also one of the big challenges. And with climate change, we need to look into carbon emissions, and water industry is energy intensive because water is heavy. If it's heavy, in order to pump it, to move it, you need quite a lot of energy. So the industry is looking into decarbonization. Um, and also now, when you mentioned COVID-19 and this pandemic, it's very clear that the provision of water services is essential for keeping public health and sanitation, obviously. So we are now looking into various ways to gather data about public health in sewers and do this water-based epidemiology to link that to what is happening with the population through the medical professionals and their work. So, um, and lastly, I think if we're talking about challenges, is the pollution. And The latest challenge with water quality and pollution is that we are getting these what people call forever chemicals. But it's what I would call, and people who are experts in the field, they call it permanent, mobile, and toxic chemicals. And that's what worries me, because we've kind of, with technology, we develop new tools. Talk about microplastics or forever chemicals. We only later on realize that some of the technologies are not good for us. They're toxic, potentially, carcinogenic. So water quality is a big issue because we have a limited, or not limited, sorry, we have a finite volume of water on Earth, and small proportion of that is water that we can drink, that is accessible to us easily. And if we pollute water, we either lose it as something that we could consume, or we need to invest in much better treatment, which means more money, more energy, more chemicals. So there are lots of challenges with water. And then if you're talking about spatial and temporal availability of water, that's always been an issue, that we quite often don't have water when the biggest conurbations are, and we need more water during summer periods, whereas in winter we have more. So we need to find a way to store it somehow. Sorry, I was going on about this, but it's quite a few of these challenges that we are facing in the water world.
Thank you very much for sharing your view on that. So I was amazed by every answer you're giving to us, because you really explained why that challenge is a challenge. And I must admit, to a few of them I was not paying attention. To some of them I did in the past, obviously, but to few of them I did not pay a lot of attention. I took it for granted, as Americans would say. Dragan, how do you think that, or maybe how could you help us in understanding how hydroinformatics could improve and further optimize consumption of the water on our planet?
Yes, there are various ways that hydroinformatics is already helping with optimizing how we use water and consume it. For example, there are artificial intelligence methods that are being used to optimize design and operation of those systems in a way that we couldn't only maybe 20 years ago. Uh, for example, if you're looking into a system of pipes, and then each and every pipe can have a different size, different diameter, and if you talk about, um, uh, say, 100 pipes and 10 possible diameters, then we are talking about 10 to the power of 100 uh, possible solutions. That means one and then 100 zeros behind it, or potential solutions, designs that we could look into. So that is kind of what is called evolutionary or nature-based computing that comes through hydroinformatics. Then we have, for example, that in the UK, on average, a leaking water system lose about 20 to 25% of the water. That's the only kind of service industry, I think, that has that situation, and that has explanation. For example, old Victorian pipes difficult to access in densely populated cities, or it's too costly to open the road in London or Birmingham or Bristol. And how do we detect those leaks if the water doesn't come on the ground and show us where it is? So we use artificial intelligence basically to look into the data, determine the patterns, and find when the normal patterns changes, so that we can then look for those leaks and reduce them. Um, Various ways. For example, we are, as I said, tracing the particles of RNA of the virus in the sewers these days, and then analyzing that data to compare it to the health situation in the population. And we use data analytics to do that. Again, part of hydroinformatics. So various ways. Finally, I would say that more and more organizations are now looking into how to inform their customer about their water usage, or in other words, to help them be more efficient with water usage and waste less. Um, an example is London, where the water supply is good, but the limited southeast of the country is quite dry in comparison, or in comparison to the number of people that live there. So what they're doing now, they're installing these smart meters, smart customers meters, that will be always in touch with the headquarters, with the control room at Thames Water headquarters, and tell them what the consumption is, so that they can better operate the system. But also they can tell their customers that they may have a leak in their house when the signal shows that there is a consumption, say continuous consumption at 3 o'clock in the morning. Where would you expect that in a normal home? So, there are lots of possible ways to help customers, to help users of water better utilize water, because we don't pay much attention to water, because that water has been there. And as I say, because it's very good quality service provided 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, people do not think about it as a product. They think, oh, it falls from the skies. It's raining. Why shouldn't we have water? But there is a whole process of cleaning, transporting, storing, and then delivering water to our houses.
Fully agree with you. I think a lot of people are not aware that basically water we drink is not the water that is, let's say, a raw product, because when water falls from the sky, you need to process it further, and then what we drink in the end is pretty much an end product. It's not a raw material. Just yesterday evening, I started. It's like, let's say, on a separate note. It's not a similar note. I started reading one book, which is on the topic of food supply chain. It's called Food Fix, written by Dr. Mark Human, who actually started writing the book after realizing that our biggest threat when it comes to food supply chain is not the quality of food. It's not the issue of climate change. Obviously, those are the issues as well. But the first and foremost issue is food waste. So we throw away 40% of the food we produce, and for me that was really a fact that blew me away. Do you maybe have some data about how much of the water winds up, let's say, unused or leaked, like you mentioned before in the UK? I think you mentioned between 15 and 20% of the water that was designated for the final customer in the end of the day winds as a leak.
Yes, and that's in a developed country that has very sophisticated water management practices and systems. In some parts of the world, those losses go to 40, 50, 60% even. Quite a lot of that water has been kind of treated, um, energy spent on it, and then it's simply kind of being lost. Not lost to the environment, but lost to those who produce it and those who need that water. So it could be very, very substantial amount of water if you think about it globally.
Will the water become a scarce resource on our planet?
It has already been scarce in quite a few areas of the world. And while on one hand we have the trend of building less storage for water, um, as I said, temporal requirements for water are quite different when water is available. So in the past, we built storage reservoirs on rivers, and because there are environmental impacts of these storage reservoirs, and because quite a few of them, particularly in the States, in North America, have reached the end of the useful life, they're now being dismantled, and rivers are being returned to the original situation. The point is now that without storage, we may not count on having enough water resources for the future. Why is that? Because population is growing in numbers. Also, the need, and you mentioned food, and globally, 70% of water consumption is for food growing, for in agriculture. So that's staggering. Much smaller percentages are being used for drinking water in cities and for industrial use. So, yes, there are scarce water resources around the world. One of our PhD students at Exeter has been looking into the water, food, and energy nexus in the area of the river Nile. So you have Ethiopia, you have um, Egypt, and Egypt is producing more and more food. They are claiming more and more of the desert and cultivating into arable land. They need more water, and then Ethiopia decides to build a dam that will produce energy, and there is this transboundary issue between at least two countries. And you have similar situation between Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, where rivers are being shared. You have Mekong, Southeast Asia. So all of those areas are kind of potentially becoming scarce because of the changes in the environment. We are growing more crops, we are bringing more people. So it's not that the water is becoming, that there is less water on Earth. It's more of us and more requirements for water.
Wow, this really blew me away. So I expected it to be a scarce resource, but not to be scarce resource already. But the way you explained, I totally get it now. Um, Maybe in that sense, let's move with the next question, which is more looking at the personal level and how we use water at the personal level. Do you have any advice? How could we at the personal level use water in a better way so we actually preserve it in the best possible way for the entire humanity?
Yes, and again, that's something that is very, very complex because we can look at the direct water use, and in the UK we use what about 140 liters per person per day. So, you know, my wife and I say we use about 300 liters per day. Um, in the States, that goes up to 200, 300 liters per person per day. In some other countries, it's much lower. The key thing is educating the public about not wasting water. And when we waste water, we also waste energy because quite often that is heated water that we use in the shower, in the kitchen. Um, when we open that tap and turn it to hot water, we also waste some of the energy if it's wasted. And people normally talk about simple stuff when brushing our teeth. We don't let the tap run all the time because you just wet your toothbrush and then stop it. When we are in the shower, 4 or 5 minutes is what is required. You shower yourself, you pour water over yourself, then close the tap, then lather your body, and then just use it for cleaning it from the residue of the soap. So lots of things like that. But we need to start reusing and recycling water, and that's one of the key messages. I think that water is a precious resource. It's essential for life, and we need to be much more careful and not wasteful. But that was only the direct bit, direct usage. When you look at the average person in the UK, as I said, we use 140 liters. The indirect use, which is through food, because in order to grow plants, to grow our food, to grow beef, to pork or whatever we eat, to buy jeans, for example, that cotton has to be irrigated and brought to the factory, then made into cloth, and then made. So, indirect use, when we import things from other countries, we actually use on average about 4,500 liters. That's quite a lot more than 140, isn't it? So we have to be aware that by using products, by buying products, by throwing clothing that's been half used or throwing food, we're also throwing away water, wasting water.
Completely agree. It's the same like when you know that people, for example, are sitting whole day in their houses working on something and working on their laptops, and then while working, they're constantly plugging in or keeping their laptops plugged in, which is complete nonsense because in that way you're not only using energy that is not necessary, but it's also that you are pretty much destroying battery on your laptops, which we all know cannot be that easily incinerated. So in the end of the day, you're creating double problems, not only one problem. And it all relates to water because we need water for everything, and it starts with also making the energy, as you mentioned before.
Yeah, yeah, that's absolutely true. Energy and water are so linked, and food as well. That's why quite a lot of interest in research and policy circles are to look into them jointly and see that policy or interventions that we make um, are not causing unintended consequences. So if you do something like with the first generation of of green fuel that was created by growing some very water thirsty plants.
Dragan, we touched base on the issue of COVID pandemic. In your opinion, did ongoing COVID pandemic increase humanity's awareness of how to effectively use water? Did COVID have any impact on the water consumption? What do you think?
Well, I believe that the pandemic has increased the awareness about water, because you remember the first messages were about washing, hygiene, and that was very, very important. Um, and also, I think that this idea of us tracing um, um, elements of the virus in the sewers have also raised the profile of sanitation, because it's the most democratic way of tracing what's happening with a population of a city or a country. Why? Because we are all connected to sewers. We know that we shed um, viruses through our feces when it end up in the sewers, and if we measure the concentration, then we measure concentration to I don't know, 100,000 people or 1 million people, depending how big the city is. Whereas if you're doing the testing of individuals, it requires quite a lot of logistical and medical support to do that. So that's what we are doing in the Netherlands on a big scale, and I believe the UK is moving in the similar direction. So yes, there is an impact from COVID or on the water systems. And also because we now work mostly from home, the patterns of our living at home have changed, or home at work. So, well, whereas normally, people would shower in the morning, have breakfast, have that cup of tea, and then go to work and then spend 8 hours there. Now they spend at home. So we saw that the morning peak of usage of water usage has kind of lowered a bit, because now people didn't have to wake up at the normal time. They could stay a bit longer in bed or wake up earlier. And also they used more water during the day at their homes. So you can see the spatial kind of impact of the change in demand, like it happened with traffic as well.
Let us go back to you and your, let's say, personal developments or developments at the personal level. Can you tell us more on what exciting projects you're currently working on in the field of hydroinformatics or any other fields when it comes to water?
Well, there are quite a few projects that we are currently working on. We just finished one with colleagues in the UK, with one of the uh, companies trying to use artificial intelligence methods, machine learning methods, to better assess leakage, so lost water. I'm starting a 6 year long project with three colleagues from Europe. This is European Research Council funding a grant that is looking into long-term sustainability of water infrastructure in cities. So we are looking at various, how can we provide a long-term development of a city that is going to grow over 100 years. And you know that water infrastructure, has to last like on average 100 years, because it's very expensive to build, and it needs to be maintained over a long period of time. So making it more sustainable, making it also resilient to these global changes like climate change, like population changes, is extremely, extremely difficult. So I'm very excited about that one, because it will occupy me for the next 6 years, in addition to obviously other duties that I have. At Exeter, we have a doctoral training center, which is working with young people getting their doctorate on this, on water and informatics. And again, this is between the universities of Bristol, Cardiff, Bath, and Exeter. So that's another area that I'm very proud of, that with my colleagues we have managed to secure funding to educate over 80 people in hydroinformatics, at the boundary of the water science and informatics science, for which there will be much more kind of requirements in the future with this digitalization and changes in our society based on availability of more data, more sensing, and clever technology.
We definitely circled back to the things we discussed in the beginning of the podcast, and that's about using data in the right way, using technology in the right way, so we optimize the way we use water.
Yes, yeah, but obviously the new technology provides many new opportunities, but also challenges. So that's why research in this area is very exciting. And because the water industry has to catch up with some other industries that have kind of been ahead of that digital transformation curve. If you just think about smart cars or self-driving cars, and if you think about the amount of sensors they have, cameras, lidar, radar, and then the software and AI methods that needs to help the driver better drive or become more secure. If you think about autopilots on airplanes, they're another example of an industry that's been far ahead of the water industry. And we are learning also from good examples and from some bad examples from other industries. Why those Boeing 737 MAX crashes are interesting to us, because they had an onboard system that some pilots didn't even know that they had, and they were apparently acting against them. And that's part of kind of AI or intelligence that we want to avoid in water systems.
Exactly. Dragan, what are the personal achievements that you currently made that you are most proud of?
Oh, that's a tough question. Basically, I'm very proud of number of PhD students that I worked with over the career. Um, Whatever 30 years in academia. Those young people, some of them are not that young anymore, but don't tell them. Are now professors on continents, on all continents, and also running their own companies, all working for ministries. So that's one of the key kind of achievements I would mention for a professor. That's one of the greatest things you could have. And also that at Exeter, we the group that I worked with and that I established has grown to a center of excellence where people are happy to visit from other organizations and work with us. And we are very prominent in European projects because people like to work with us. We've introduced quite a lot of technologies, that artificial technology, serious gaming technology is the latest one that we've kind of introduced into the industry that they didn't think of possible before. So, but the key thing for me is, I like working in this area, and I believe it was Mark Twain who was quoted saying, "Find a job you enjoy doing, and you will never have to work a day in your life." And that's how I feel about it.
The one can definitely see that based on with what passion you talk about all the issues we discussed previously. Before we close, I have one final question, and that is about the role of education. Why do you think the education is important?
Well, again, if we go back just to this technology change, we had a huge, immense change over the last 20, 30 years. And I'm pretty sure people in before the Second World War and after could say the same. The technological change is very fast and it's accelerating. And we need to keep up with that. In order to do it, we have to educate people who can master the technology, who can be innovative, who can find a new technology, but use it in the best possible way. But we also need to educate the public about the preciousness of our water and water resources, about how complex the systems are for bringing the water to our houses or taking wastewater away, or how important it is to protect our water resources. So when you are out in the field and when you see a creek or a river, just think this is all ours. We need to be able to protect it rather than pollute it. So quite a lot of reason for various kinds of education about water.
Dragan, any last words? Anything else that you would like to mention before we come to the close?
Yeah, I would say I think we need to value water more. Um, water has a very high value but low cost, and I know people will listen to this and say how water is very low cost. But when you think about it, going to a pub and a pint of beer can cost you £5. We get 1,000 liter of water delivered for much less than that, and also taken away as a wastewater. So we need to understand the link between the value and appropriately cost water services that we receive.
Dragan, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for an amazing conversation about the future of water systems and how to use water properly. And thanks for being my guest in the RNT podcast.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and I really enjoy this. And I think it's for a worthy cause, so I'm very happy to oblige.